Well, this is definitely a Nintendo Switch Online update. For those who watch these review crew episodes, you already know that what we do here is we dig up the classic magazine reviews for all the old school games released on the Nintendo Switch Online service. That's normally pretty easy, since we're pulling reviews from not only the American and British magazines, but pretty much any publication that's written in English. However, in case you haven't already noticed, this is not a normal week, with only one of the 4 games having received a proper American release back in the day. This week's Nintendo Switch Online releases include Quest for Camelot, Kirby Star Stacker, Downtown Nekketsu March Super Awesome Field Day, and of course the obscure Nintendo classic Joy Mech Fight. That's a pretty cool and completely random list of games. But are any of them actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Computer and Video Games, Nintendo Power, and, well, pretty much just those 2 magazines, and see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Brace yourself, because this is going to be the worst and most frustrating episode of the Nintendo Switch Online review crew. Just know that I tried my hardest. I really did. Just in case you were looking for the game with the most ridiculously long title, here's Downtown Nekketsu March Super Awesome Field Day. While you may not recognize that name right away, it is actually part of the Kunio-kun series, the franchise that gave us both River City Ransom and Crashing the Boys Street Challenge. This is basically a race from one side of the city to the other. The idea is to trip up the competition as much as possible, all while successfully navigating the urban terrain to come in first place. This game was previously released as part of the Double Dragon and Kunio-kun Retro Brawler bundle back in 2020, and while I loved the concept, this was not one of my favorite games on that compilation. Sadly, there are no English language reviews to turn to, but I suggest that you give it a couple of runs and then just completely forget about it. Yeah, that's pretty much what happened when I played it a few years ago. At first glance, it's easy to write off Joy Mech Fight as just this weird 8-bit fighting game with these crazy characters. But look again, because this game is actually more than just crazy mech characters. As hard as it is to believe, this is actually Nintendo being so impressed by Street Fighter 2 that they had to make their own one-on-one fighting game. Their first since Urban Champion. Sure, the gameplay is simplified and the graphics are undeniably archaic, but you can definitely see the Street Fighter influence in every fight. What's cool about this game is how Nintendo went all in when developing it, not only giving us cool backgrounds to look at, but also loading the Famicom cartridge with 36 different characters, which, if you can believe it, was actually the largest roster in a fighting game until the King of Fighters 98 rolled in with 38. Much like Downtown Nekketsu March, there aren't any English language magazine reviews for Joy Mech Fight. But hey, don't let that get in the way of checking out one of Nintendo's weirdest fighting games. This is a great addition to the Nintendo Switch Online service. What is it with Nintendo and puzzle games? Instead of letting the games just stand on their own, Nintendo insists on shoving their most recognizable characters into every single puzzler just to squeeze a few extra sales out of the thing. Kirby Star Stacker is yet another example of this annoying trend. It's a game that was first released on the Game Boy back in 1997, then ported 1 year later to the Super Famicom in Japan. The original plan was to release the 16-bit version overseas, but when Nintendo of America stopped shipping Super Nintendo units back in 1997, those plans were killed. With no American release, we're forced to use the reviews of the Game Boy version, which is, by all accounts, identical to the 16-bit upgrade. Wait, did I say reviews plural? Well, it's really only one, and it comes from Nintendo Power. Giving it a 3.2 out of 5, they liked that it seemed simple, but was very challenging and fun. They're also impressed by the 4 different modes. They said that they didn't like that the higher difficulty levels are truly demented, and complained that Kirby is just a figurehead. Yeah, see that, Nintendo? When even your own magazine is complaining about the way you shove characters into puzzle games, then you know you have a problem. Now here's a Game Boy Color game you probably weren't expecting. Quest for Camelot is a 1998 adventure game based on the Warner Brothers movie starring Cary Elwes and Gary Oldman. It was both a critical and financial flop, which meant that the video game adaptation had a real uphill climb when it was released 7 months later to almost no fanfare. It's basically an action role-playing game where you take control of Kaylee on her adventure to rescue her mother and the Excalibur sword from the evil knight Ruber. Yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. Believe it or not, the few critics that reviewed Quest for Camelot seemed to like it a little bit better than the movie. Nintendo Power gave the game a 7.4 out of 10 and argued that Quest for Camelot stands in the company of Link's Awakening in the Final Fantasy games. Scott explained that Titus, along with the dedicated team at Nintendo, have created a great reason to buy Game Boy Color. Henry agreed, saying that the game has depth. Yay, depth. Across the pond, computer and video games weren't nearly as impressed, giving the game a measly 3 out of 5. Quest for Camelot is a cute adventure that borrows heavily from Zelda. There are plenty of characters to talk to, soldiers to fight, and errands you must run to progress. The graphics look like they belong on the Super Nintendo, not the Game Boy. There's even a fancy warp effect when you go through the magic tunnel. Will that warp effect be fancy enough to get you to play Quest for Camelot? Yeah, probably not. But from what I hear, it's better not to go to Camelot. 'Tis a silly place.
Kirby がアクションパズルゲームに初登場。どんどん星を集めよう。カービィのキラキラキッズゲームボーイポケットでね。
Hey, thanks for watching us break down these classic reviews. We normally have way more reviews to work with, but let me tell you, this was a weird update. Not a bad update, as some would have you to believe, but definitely a weird one. Hopefully, the magazine critics will have a lot more to say in the next batch of Nintendo Switch Online games. Now, here's the question I have for you. What do you want to see Nintendo release next on Nintendo Switch Online? There are a bunch of Game Boy Advance and N64 games announced for the end of the year, but there could still be a few more that squeak through. Honestly, I want to see them complete the Ninja Gaiden trilogy. Also, Rolling Thunder 2 on the Genesis. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a review of The Bridge Curse: Road to Salvation. This is a review that was originally going to go live today, but Nintendo dropped all these Nintendo Switch Online games, and you know, I think the schedule gets mixed around, and you know what I mean. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.